Hello. So in this video, I want to walk you through what I call the pattern tutorial. So the idea is that we're going to make a sketch that draws a square that's moving around the screen. And then eventually the way that we get it to move, change position, even change color, it's going to form a pattern when you look at it all together. So let's get started with drawing just the base, that square there. So inside the function draw, after it places the background there, then we're going to go ahead and draw a square. Now, I eventually want this square to be able to change its position. So before I even do that, I'm going to go to the top of the code and define my variables. Define variables as a reminder here. And then I'm going to do let x equal 0, let y equal 0. So I made those x and y variables. That way, eventually, I'll be able to make those change as they are moving across the screen. Then I'm going to go ahead and create a size variable. Set that equal to 50 for the size of the square, being like the width and the height of it. Now, I'm not actually going to modify this variable in this example here, but I find it useful to go ahead and give it a name because I am going to use it over and over again. Just in case I wanted to change this to something else while I'm playing around with it, then I can very easily just change the number here. But with x and y, I actually want those numbers to be modified by the code. So I definitely need those to be variables. So when I go to actually draw the square, I'm going to use those variables here. So x and y, what I'm drawing is what I call x and y, and then the width of the square within height is going to be my variable size. Right, so I at least got the square to show up here. So the next step is to make it move across the screen. All right, so I'm just going to write a little comment here to say that this was draw square. And then my next little section is to be move square. And I'm first going to get it to move across the screen here. So I'm definitely going to modify the x. And at first I want it to kind of grow as it's going. I want it to go toward the right. There's a few different ways you could type this, but I'm going to use the shorthand plus equals. And then the amount of pixels that I want it to change by each time. All right, so let's see what that looks like. So you can see the square moving across the screen here. And that actually is faster than really what I want it to be. So I'm gonna change that in a second, but I'm gonna think a little bit more about this number that's here. What I end up wanting is to see a pattern of all of these squares next to each other. So I don't just want to move it by a little bit each time. I actually want to move it by an entire size of the square. So I can actually just use my variable here to say size. And then inside the function setup is where I'm going to change this setting here of how fast my animation is moving. Right, so just change the comment to say slow down animation. All right, and here's how I do this. I use the frame rate function in P5. So it's two words put together, so notice the capital R here. And I'm going to set the frame rate to something a lot slower, to 2. Right, 2 frames per second is really, really slow. The default is 60, right? So it's 1/30th the speed of what we were seeing before. But this will just allow us to see our pattern a little bit more clearly that we're building. Right? So you can see every half of a second, then it's doing the steps that we're asking it to do. But as you can see, it just completely moves off the screen. So I want to do something to get it to go back into the next row. So I always want that x to be increasing. So I'm actually going to do this in kind of a printer motion where it's always going off to the right. But when it detects that it got too far to the right, then I want to have it move down to the next row and continue going in that same direction. So sometimes I want it to reset. So I'm going to have this, I'm just going to make some extra space here. I have this move to next row when it's at the end here. Right now, sometimes I want it to do this and sometimes I don't. So I need an if statement here. I'll just type my boilerplate if expression, if 3 is greater than 2. That's up some space. All right, so here I'm going to type in an actual condition that matters in my code instead of this 3 greater than 2 to test whether it's at the end of the row here. And then inside the curly braces, I'm going to do something to make it move to the next row. Right, so let's first try to figure out this condition. How do I know that it's too far over to the right? Well, it's going to be something to do with x, kind of tells us that. And then I want to compare it to some number telling me that it's too far to the right. All right, so it happens to be 400. Right, if that x position is all the way over to the side. Then what do I want to have happen? I want it to move to the next row. Well, that's kind of like the y position. So I'm going to change the y. Right, notice I use the same plus equals notation. So that is the same thing as saying this, just like I did on line 18 with the x. If I said y equals y plus size, right, instead of writing an expression this way, then I can write it this way. It's the same thing. It says make x grow by whatever size it is. You know, if I explicitly said 50, then y would grow by 50 every time. Or I can use a variable. Right? So you might know what's going to happen here. Now the y did change, we just don't see it because it's off to the other side. So I also need to reset the x back to 0. And it's a little bit hard to see, and we'll notice a little bit later on that there's something we could tweak with this, but let's just leave that for now. All right, so we have our first stage of getting a square moving across the screen, and then we'll keep making some additions in this tutorial.